Hello and welcome back to the IPControl 16 evaluation series, and this is going to be the API video 2. And as I mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and cover the use of the Postman product, outside of our product of course, but interacting with the APIs for IPControl, so the ability to call the simple APIs, but then to have the ability using Postman's pre-request capabilities to make a call to the login API to get the token, to set a global variable that's then going to be used in the authorization using the bearer token and this token. So this will dynamically change each time it runs. It'll get this token and fill it in dynamically. So I'll cover all of that. We'll just kind of walk through this, and then I'm going to cover a couple of APIs and kind of some of their functionality and how it works here individually, showing how some of those imports, exports might work. And then I'll show some scripts that'll cover this, and I may have to get into a second video on this, or the third, to cover just the scripting side, but we'll see if we can get to it. So the first thing is, with Postman, you have the ability to set up collections. And so what I recommend doing here, and I've just done this before too, is I go through and set up as many APIs as I can, go through all the different demos, and I have other collections here where I have different evaluation videos, and I have other types of data that I have available to me. So one, you can create these collections to kind of group together all of your different API requests if you're not familiar with that. Second of all, in your different collections, there are various authorization, so you can do this globally. This is the token, and here's how we're going to do this. And I'm going to use this token variable here, which I'm going to set in the variables for the collection, and I'm going to use two. I have a login URL, which I'm still working around with, but then the token, which we use in the pre-request, and this dynamically gets populated and will change. So the first thing is what we want to do, and just an example of the login. And up under your post, you want to make sure you have https://:8443, and then the way to call the API is ingress API v1 and then the API name. So it might be exports or imports, etc. But then you're also going to have on those particular commands, you'll have the URL. So what we'll do with this is, you might need to get the URL out here if you want to see it. So get this Swagger interface, and this is where this will come in handy for you. And then you'll see here what this specific URL is. And if you run any of the examples, it'll give you the exact URL that you could simply paste in that command. So in this case, it's login. Now the headers on this, we always need to set the content type, and in this case we're using a form URL encoded, so XWWW form URL encoded. We have an accept type of application JSON, so we do expect this output JSON. And then in the body of this, we're passing two fields, a username and a password, and the values. And this is what's going to authenticate against your IPControl login and user, so you have your users with API CLI access. And that could be, of course, external authentication as well, so whatever that user password is here. And then the output of this is the access token, and it expires. So you can save this, of course, and then we can run this at any time, and this will give us a new token, and everything runs great there. Now in the post response here, I had it set up to update the tokens. So there's also, in the case of these scripts, where if you wanted to set it through this type login, you could, or you could have it done through a pre-request like I'm going to show you here in just a second. So that's just a real simple command for the logins. Now, in terms of the exports and kind of what we did earlier, and kind of simulate that with the init and export and all of that in the same command, what I've got here is then first, in the authorization type, we use bearer token, and we want to put the curly brackets token in our field description. And then the authorization, or our headers, accept, and we need content type, both application JSON. Your body then becomes the same thing we put into the Swagger interface. This is your query, your page size, so this will set it up, export it, break it down, and we're going to tell it no free blocks. So this is the exact same command we ran previously. But in the script section of this, I have a pre-request. And let's see if I can pull this all the way open so you can see everything if you need a screen capture. So I'm setting this up as URL that's going out, and I'm using it within the script to just simply call, here's the command, here's the login, go out and log in, and then set this token with the value, which is then going to be used in this authorization. Right? And so by running that, I should then get an export of the subnets, which, as you can see here in the below, I did. And it used those values dynamically. So I only had to run this init export. It broke everything down in that same command. I didn't have to run a login. It did everything for me. So when you're setting this up and you're doing these exports, this is that complexity that I mentioned that you can simplify by doing the pre-requests. And the same would work if you were going out in a scripting language, which I'll show you in some of the shell stuff here, that you go out, you still have to get the token, but you can do it in a way that you can automate that, pull it back into your script, use it as a header, just call that simple script every time you do that. And then lastly, just as a comment, we do have an IPControl software development kit written in Python, which in one of these series I'm going to try to get it set up and show and demonstrate at some point. But I find that a lot of my customers and clients use Python as their scripting languages. So there's a whole suite of these scripts automatically, or API Python scripts there that you can duplicate. And then we also have some Ansible functionality there that we'll talk about too. So back to this one. So this is the export child blocks, and that worked exactly as I expected. Very simple input. And just so you know, I'm not trying to sell Postman or anything, but you can visualize this as well. And this will again give you an idea of, what are the different fields and columns, and then if you wanted to take this post-response table structure, you could modify this accordingly and then export and import your data. So now I want to go on to another concept here that I'm going to talk about, which we get into the scripts, and then we get into a number of the different capabilities we talked about earlier with the site templates, having the ability to go out and create a series of subnets based on, I want a small branch and it has a 24, a 29, a 30, and then we might have an IPv6 block or something like that, and then setting up the scopes and the allocation ranges and all of that. So the first thing is, in order to get to that point, was the ability to go in and do a clone, and to clone those containers. So in Swagger, as I was mentioning in the last video, just before we left, there is a API which allows us to clone a container, and by specifying a pre-existing container name, the parent name, if you want to reparent it into another hierarchical hierarchy, and then the name of the container to clone. So as an example, if I were looking out here, which I've done with my sites here, I can go out and I create in all of my hierarchy, and something to consider if you're going to do a lot of APIs and templating. But I create template containers, and these template containers maintain all of the policies that I need for all of my sites that I expect within each of my state locations in my examples. So under demo, I have demo 0001, which is the template. I can clone it and then just give it a new name, which I do here, and I could just simply go to the container maintenance in this environment, click on that container, do clone container, give it a new name, and we'll do test, demo test clone, and I don't need to change anything else. So the idea is that once we have all of the attributes necessary, there's no sense in go back in and clone or do anything further. So here's the example, and lastly, I'm going to go out and I'm going to just change this because I have run this a few times. Well, we'll keep that one there, but you'll see here that I don't have any subnets at this point. So I've got the clone container, but then I would need to go in and do add site, grab the template here, and go ahead and do submit, and that's fine, and that'll go ahead and create that. So now to simulate that in this environment through the API, and you'll see we have the subnets, we would first do the clone. So I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to do DC3, and this is my template. So again, I have authorization, bearer token, token. I have my accept and content type, very important to have. your body, but then I'm also doing the pre-request. So I'm setting up that login to my executive to get this token, and then I'm setting it so I can use it into the call. And the body is this. So I'm going to go ahead and clone that. All right, and the only thing I get back is an array of a string, created clone, and here's the name. And if I look back into IPControl and I can refresh the container, I now have my container. All right, so now it's ready basically to go to that site template. But I need to change this a little bit too. So now we have a site template that allows you to call a site template name, which is one we have already set up in this IPControl system, demo site small. And that's all I need. And it uses all of the attributes from whatever the template is in that policy setting. So I go under Tools, and if I go to Site Allocation Templates, here's my demo site, here are my details. So by having all of this, I can use the template name. But you can also specify this programmatically. So if you had some type of APIs that went out and called addresses or called networks, you could have this build a site template based on here are the subnets and here are the types and here are the allocation and UDFs, and you can literally build all of that template information into your JSON and submit that instead. Now, I'm taking the easy way out because I have these templates and I want to do it that way because it's easier enough for me. So what we hope to get here is we're going to log in, we're going to invoke that command, it's going to go out and it's going to generate the subnets using that template, and it's going to give us a result that we can then parse out and do something with, just like it did up here in the top when we looked at it. And then when we look in this view, we're going to see here is our DC3, and it's going to have the subnets in it. And so everything is then created, v4, v6, everything we need. And I can now go and do DHCP configuration deployment and deploy to the server, and that would have everything you needed. Or it would be picked up in a scheduled task, which is more recently or more likely to happen every hour or 30 minutes or something like that. So that's two ways of looking at this, and that's a great way then to take these two and to combine them into a single script that would do that type of function. So I had, and I'm just going to show you here, this add site script, and hopefully you can see this. And in this script, first of all, I have another script which I have set up that is basically just running the login API using curl, and I then JQ it out and pull out the access token. So this is JQ is the processor, and .access token is the object .access. I'm then going to go in and set a couple of variables based on the input. So %1 or $1 is in INC admin my username in this case. 2 is the container that we're going to clone. So I'm going to clone the demo-0001, demo being the parent, and then the new container name. I'm then going out and cloning the container, so doing the exact same thing we just did. Apologies. Process running here. So then we clone that container and we get through that. And then it's going to go a little bit further down and then create the site template, invoking it with that new container name that was just created. And all I'm going to get then is just the subnets. Input of this, and this hopefully we can get this right. And I would normally, put in some syntax to this, but I'm doing this pretty quickly on the fly. All right, so we need %1, 2, and 3. All right, so let's go back up here to this clone container so we can kind of duplicate what we've done here. And so clone is 2, parent, and new. So we've got clone 2, 3. Okay, so we're going to do add site. SH, and I'm going to do my username. And then the site to clone is going to be demo-0001. The parent, which we're going to tell it is demo, because that's where it is. So when you clone a container, by the way, it clones it at the same hierarchical position of where the clone is, or the name of the container to clone. If you want to reparent, you could tell it to go outside of this by specifying this parent. And then we're going to do here just test demo test script 1. And we're going to run that. And that is going to go do all three of those APIs, import the site, import the templates, and then we get all of this done in one command. So now imagine that we're doing this, say, in a workflow, or we're doing this through a PHP or Python script. You could then have any type of web input form or some type of sync in between another application, and that then is going to create all of your data. So now just a couple points here too. Now when you go to create these, you cannot just delete these containers. So when you're dealing with them, I can't just go over here now that I've done this, now that it has subnets, and delete it. It's going to say unable to delete, container has blocks. So if you're doing a lot of this, or you're scripting a lot, and you're doing it in bulk, a couple things you're going to want to clean up afterwards. And the best way to do that is you're going to have to delete them. Now, I would normally set up another script or some functionality that would go out and do a delete to clean this up. And we do this for some workflows, so maybe we'll do that in a couple others. But just so you know, you have to delete this. This will take some time to do before you can delete these containers. So just keep that in mind. Now the next couple of imports here I'm going to cover are basically two different types of the way we use IPControl to give us the next available IP address or give us the next available subnet. And the condition behind this is where we use the containers, and we use the block types in the containers. And instead of specifying an IP address or an address to use, we give it basically the container, which is always required, the block type, the size, and the status at a minimum. These four fields. It's wrapped within an import child block structure, and then we tell it to exclude from discovery false. We can give it description, and we can fill in other details here, but the point being is the simplest form of simply give me the next available block. So this import is in the imports, and it's import child block, case sensitive. Again, our accept content type. Our pre-script is again running the same prescripts. It's the same everywhere, just copy paste. And then the body here. So what I expect this to do then is when it goes out, it's going to look for the next available subnet, and the only thing I'm going to see here is the subnet result. Now that's okay, I guess, but typically you want then to go out and get that subnet so that you can do something with it, like modify it or do some other things. But I want to point out just that API, because the whole point of it is give me the next available subnet and let me do something with it and do values and things like that, which works really well. And it's the easiest way to get the next available subnet so that you can use these policies the way they're intended to be used, which is once we know what's allocated, how it's allocated, we know it's free. And we can keep track of that to allow the next available. And along the lines of that, within the get block, since I deleted these blocks, when you are looking for the next available subnet, if you do need to know what it is, before the system hands it out to you, there is a gets method type, and it's a get allocation candidate list that you specify the container, the block type, and the block size, and this will give you the next available list or address of the next available subnets. So in this, actually, I think the limit here is just going to give you one here in this particular case. But this is telling me that if I were to go out and run this next available subnet, it should give me 8. And so I see here 8. Then if I were to run this again, I'll see 9. And if I go back and forth. So you can interactively use these to get the next available candidate so that you can import the full child block and all of its details versus give me the next available, then go get the block, then modify the block. So there's a couple of things there you might want to do. And then when we look at the import device, we have effectively two different import APIs for devices. And if you look in Swagger real quick, under device, I first want to point out that the import device, singular, has been deprecated, although it still works. It's going to be removed eventually. But it was a simplified way of specifying an IP. You just needed an IP address, a host name, an object type, like unspecified or something, and then a class, like static, reserved, or manual DHCP, DDHCP. Worked really well, but then they added the import devices, which is its replacement, and it's a far more complex and capable API, but it works on the concept of interfaces. So that if you have an IP address and it has one interface, you have to create the interface and add that detail to it, and then an array of interfaces if you want multiple, and so on. But it has the added advantage that I can give it a range number and it'll allocate addresses, and I can tell it I need explicitly a contiguous range, or just randomly give me the next available 5 or 10 or 100 addresses, and it goes through that functionality. So I wanted to point this out. So here you would see this is kind of the structure of that import devices. You have that options section that if we go back and look at, I guess we can't look at the docs here. Let's see where my doc is. Okay, it looks like I lost it here, but if I go back and look at the documentation, this is going to give me the breakdown of the options. It's then going to have the import device wrapper with the interfaces. So this is the array of interfaces, and I can have multiples here. And within each of these, it's going to have the container, a name, which I think it'll default to default. I think you do need this. But then the IP address is where we get into really how the system works best. Once I know the IPs and the ranges and DHCP scopes and reservations, I know that what's unused is available for static, and then I can use the directional allocation strategies of IP control from start, from end, or random. Just give me a random address. I then have static, which is based on everything you see here is an array. So if I have multiple IP addresses or anything along those lines, it would be a comma with each interface type, its address, and its allocation type. Now down into the domain, I want to add this to a DNS domain, so I'm going to tell it the domain type's default, which in this case it is. I'm using devpriv as my DNS domain. But you'll note here I'm using on the host name a special policy called apply naming policy, all caps. This works hand in hand with your naming policies for that device type, which is why I preference this when we started setting all of this up to make sure these are set if you get into this apply naming policy. And the idea behind it again is if you need a range of IPs, you may not know all their addresses and names now, but I can give you IPs, you can then go get the names and you can update them or do something with that data. So this is the example here. And within this, I'm going to then allocate 5 IP addresses within the next available per server, and it should just give me back the details. So this is going to give us back all of those IP addresses that were allocated. So by using the range method, this is how that would look, and it kind of gives you a continued message here showing you each of these individual messages up to the end. Right? So it's kind of an aggregate list of messages to kind of keep track of the numbering even, if you're looking at it that way. And that was really some simple APIs, a couple of scripts there that I want to show you. But over here on this side again, and just back up, we'll just cover it now in this one video. You'll note in that when I did the ask script, I had a test login where I'm calling it. So I have a function for this script that's setting a variable that basically in my third-party curl scripts directly, I have a file where I keep my password. So it's password protected for my user, and I can lock it down further. But I would suggest you do something like that so that you're not putting passwords on the command line like I'm doing here to demonstrate it, that you protect it behind the scenes, and I pipe this in every time. So whatever this is, I can do that. And you could even look in doing like base encrypt and decrypt, and maybe even some more advanced stuff there. But then what I'm doing is I'm doing the curl to do the login using my username, password, substituting and having to unquote and put my variable, requote each of my variables, and then calling it and using it. So in all of my scripts, that function first, when I look at like my next add next IP, so the very first function, I go out and I run that, and then I grab that token, I do some variables, substitution, some things to clean it, and then I look at the subnet that I'm asking for here, pulling it all together, so I could then do the same thing. I could do add next IP, and then give it INC admin, and then the subnet, and something like that, and this will give me the next available, and then I can pull out things like user-definable fields, the default gateway, DNS domains, and other values. So that's some real simple scripting. The second video, and I'm gonna leave it there at the 25-minute mark and plus some. And then the third video, I'm gonna think about what might be useful and come back with some additional APIs and kind of go through some things that doing some automation like domain imports or site imports, things like it. So thanks again for joining me. Hope you learned something here, made it useful. And join me again in the next video, and we'll carry on. Take care.